everybody. Hello. Thank you for coming. There's so many places that you could be tonight, and it's so fun that all of you chose to be here. Like I was saying earlier, there's so many familiar faces, and it's odd for me because I'm used to seeing each of you alone in a tiny room, and now you're all here with each other. I'm glad that you care what I might have to say. A lot of you have heard parts of this before, so hopefully there's some new. And I'm still recognizing people that I haven't said hello to yet. Hello. Hopefully there's some new in this. Thank you to Coastal for having me. And just thanks for wanting to listen. This isn't my job. This is what I do. This is who I am. So I would be doing it with one person or no people. I do that too. So thank you all for coming. And I've got a new clicker that I'm learning. So what we're going to do tonight, I want to cover three things. I want to cover the seasonal philosophy. So in Chinese medicine, we have ways of making sense of what's happening in autumn and what's happening in winter that can help us orient to the seasons better, align to them better, enjoy them better, not feel oppressed by them, oppressed by the cold and the dark. Any of you who got my emails when I was joking about, we just get so frustrated with winter, right? So how can we actually look at the virtue in winter and benefit from it? Number two is the self-care strategy. So how can you then align yourself with what's actually going on? And then number three is the extra support. So, and a bunch of you who see me in clinic, you know what my go-tos are and probably have them. But our bodies, no matter how well we're generally taking care of ourselves, sometimes need extra support. And I've got some that I use, that my patients use, that work really, really well. Can everybody hear me in the back? Yeah? Okay. So I'm Alexa Gilmore. I'm an acupuncturist. I'm a Chinese medicine physician. I've been in Portland, Maine for about 6 years. Previous to that, I was in Austin, Texas. And I have a practice that's really a general practice, and a lot of what I do, regardless of why someone's coming to see me, is to help you understand what's happening in your body so that ultimately you can take better care of yourself in the long run and not need someone like me quite so often. Some bonuses tonight. So hopefully everybody checked in on your way in. If you didn't, please do. I don't know how the streaming is going to go, but if there are streamers who can actually hear me, we've got streamers happening over here, DM me your email. Everyone who's here and everyone who emails me, I'm going to send you a cheat sheet with all the tips. So take notes if you want to, but I'll also send you something to review. So make sure you check in. I can't do that without your email. And then, oh, I forgot this part, Kim. Someone's going to win something. So we need to pick a name, but not now, at the end. So, and to the streamers, it's standing room only in here, which is very exciting. Have we broken a record for people at the Coastal Talk?
How do we sign in if we left the front door?
Before you go, make sure you check in with me or Kim in the back, and I'll remember you. You can also just say, hey, Alexa. Okay, upcoming events. So back here, same place, same time, December 4th. Less universally appealing, I'm going to be talking about menstrual cycles. So I'm going to be talking about endometriosis and dysmenorrhea, the things that you can do on your own, the ways that Chinese medicine makes sense of that. Women's health is near and dear to my heart. We can be grateful for all of the big interventions we have to treat all sorts of things, including women's health, but too often we're using really big interventions. We're using hormones, we're removing organs when we don't need to. And so part of my mission is to get the word out to people that we don't need to do that they don't need to suffer. So if this speaks to you or somebody that you love, please come back in December and please spread the word. Those of you who got emails for this talk will get emails for that one as well. And please ask questions. In putting this together, it's really hard to be in my position because I just live and breathe this information, and it's hard for me to discern sometimes what's in my head that's also in everybody else's head and what's in my head that none of you know, and I take it for granted. So I tried to put together a lecture that's going to communicate some things. If you have questions, raise your hand, and let's make this interactive, okay? Keep an open mind. If the number 2 here, anyone who's been to see me in clinic knows one of my favorite phrases is get curious, right? If you want to raise your hand if you see me and I've told you get curious, right? I do it all. So I want you to be interested about what I'm sharing, but then try it out. Don't take my word for it, right? I'm sharing this stuff with you because I know that it works, but the whole point is, does it work for you? Not just doing it because someone said so. So get curious, try it out, and then I also like, in general, for us to banish I know from our vocabulary. When we say I know, some of the things I'm going to present are going to seem really simple. And you're going to go, yeah, oh, I know, I totally know that. Well, so if you know it, and you know that it's good for you, why aren't you doing it? So there's something about it that you don't know, and knowing something intellectually doesn't mean that you're actually taking it in and embodying it and putting it into practice. So at the end of the night tonight, be thinking, one of the things I'm going to ask you is to turn to a partner and let them know what your big takeaways were and what's the first thing you're going to do to implement to make some changes tomorrow. Because there's no reason for you to be here tonight if you're not planning on implementing some of this stuff to have a better autumn and winter, right? Is that fair? Yeah. Yes? Okay. So here we start. 'Tis the season. So what's actually going on? Oh, no, we have to go back a little bit. So this is where I was like, how much Chinese medicine theory do I share with them? So starting with the basics, I might need this. In Chinese medicine, who's familiar? Who knows what these are? Anyone? Shout it out. 5 elements, right? 5 phases, 5 elements. So this is one of, there's lots of different kind of theory structures that we use to make sense of the body. 5 element is one of the basic ones. So it's a way to understand the body, it's a way to understand nature, it's a way to understand the whole planet, and how all of these elements are interacting with each other in a dynamic way at any given time. None of them are static, but how they're keeping each other in check, how they're flourishing and then keeping each other in check in terms of checks and balances, have a lot to do with how healthy any given system is, whether it's our human body, whether it's a small ecosystem, or whether it's a larger ecosystem. So this is where we start. And so in explaining this to you, part of what I'm trying to communicate is that nothing is inherently good or bad. It's all about the context. And that comes to seasons too. When we're frustrated about autumn and it's just cold and dark, or winter it's just cold and dark, well, no, we got to think about the context, what it's balancing and why it's useful. So one idea is to think of a body of water, a standing body of water, right? So on the left we have a lake. For translating into health terms, we can think about the lake as being physiological. Like it's a body of water that is healthy. It's a healthy functioning ecosystem. It's intended to be there. On the right, it's still a body of water, right? But that's not a healthy body of water. That's a pathological body of water. We don't want that water to be there in a flood. So this idea that just because we have a body of water, not inherently good or bad, entirely about the context, right? You with me? And then we have the idea of a puddle versus a flood. So a puddle isn't quite a healthy body of water, right? It's not supposed to be there, but it's also not that big of a deal. We had a big rain, a little bit more than was expected. The landscape, the ecosystem, the human body, if there's this version of this in the body, it's going to be able to recover on its own. And maybe you even play with it a little bit in the meantime, right? So it's not the end of the world. We don't love it, but we're going to recover. As opposed to a flood, which is a much bigger deal, and ultimately we recover, but often have to bring in kind of external help to help with that recovery, right? So the same thing is true in the body. We've got parts of the body, or in the time of year, which is what we're going to get to, right? Parts of the body that we want to be more wet, parts of the body that we want to be more dry. When a wet part is dry, that's a problem. When a dry part is wet, that's a problem. The problem isn't that there's dryness or that there's wetness, it's that they're in the wrong place. If things get just, oh, I have a pointer too. If things get just a little bit displaced, as on this side, the body, a healthy body, is going to be able to recover. So you catch a cold, not ideal, you recover. You catch a stomach bug, not ideal, you recover. You catch a big cold, you get something like pneumonia, bronchitis, and then you get it again. Now your lungs are weak, and now you're predisposed to more puddles and probably more floods down the road. Does that all make sense? Yeah? Okay. So same thing, desert versus drought, right? Nothing wrong with dryness. Deserts are natural, we need them. Drought is a problem. And this was my first experience of this, realizing this, when I was 18, I moved to California, and this was my walk every morning. And this is what it looked like in August and September. And my 18-year-old self, who'd never left New England, just figured like, oh, the hills in California are brown. That's just what they are all the time. Went through fall semester, came home for Christmas, went back in January, and on my same walk, Everything that had been completely brown for all those months was now green. We know there's these terrible wildfires burning in California now, but it's typical in California to have it not rain all summer long, right? What happens in Maine if it doesn't rain all summer long? It's a problem. Like, that's a drought. But not raining all summer long in California is not inherently a drought the way that it is here in Maine. It's physiological for that part of the country. It's physiological for that environment. So, taking it into the human body, a dry mouth is not what we're going for. Wet palms, not a healthy body. Now, this happens under what circumstances? Dry mouth, wet hands. Huh? When you're nervous, like maybe I have that a little bit in front of all of you. Right? But you're nervous, and you're nervous for a short period of time, and then you recover, right? Your body can handle it. But there are people who come to see me because they have dry mouth that doesn't go away, and because they have wet palms all of the time, right? That's not physiological. Things aren't where they should be. Okay, so then does that all make sense? Any questions so far? Okay. So then we get into, like, who cares in terms of seasons, and I just want to not get the flu, right? So we're going to get there eventually. So this is a little bit of a more complicated picture of the 5 elements. So this picture shows us all of the ways they're related, some of the ways, not all of them, and the ways that they try to keep each other in check. So if we look at this cycle here, this is what's called the generating cycle. So to simplify it, each of these elements kind of engenders the next element, and they're all related to seasons. So we'll come back around to it. But if let's start here, right? So this is water. Water generates wood. Does that make intuitive sense? Plants, trees, all things green, they need things to grow, right? So water generates wood. Wood generates what? Fire. Right? Fire has to have wood. So if we think of the seasons, water is winter. Winter generates spring, and the water of winter generates that wood. Spring generates summer, and the wood of spring fuels the burning, connective heat fire of summer. Summer, this gets a little tricky here. Summer, or fire, generates, what happens when we burn things? Ash, and then where does ash go? What would we think? It does go into the air. It also turns back into earth for our purposes, right? So we burn things, I mean, that's what's happening in some ways in California now. Some of it's going up, it's burning down, becoming more earth, right? Now, earth is not its own season. Earth is late summer, and I think we had actually a pretty good example of late summer in Maine, where it's like wasn't quite summer, but until a couple weeks ago, it wasn't quite autumn yet either. So it's either late summer or it's the transition time. And that's because it's true for seasons, but Earth has all kinds of other properties too that are that in-between time, or the in-between transitions. And then Earth generates, this one's a little less, well, this one's still obvious, I guess. Earth generates metal. So where do we find metal? It's all deep in the earth, pressurized in the earth. And then kind of the biggest leap, I think, when I was first learning this, is that metal generates water. So I think of that as water condenses on metal. That's the easiest way to think of it. So that's the generating cycle. All of these elements turning one into another, and then summer kind of going through late autumn, late summer, into autumn, into winter, back into spring, summer, in a cycle like that. So it begins to show you how we need all of the elements and all of the seasons to express them. Then there's this other, we good? Interesting, hopefully, so far? Then there's this other checking cycle. So if we look at these arrows here, this way, this way, this way, this way, and this way, these are the ways they keep each other in check. Because we said they're not just continually growing each other, we have to keep things in balance also. Wet has to be, this is a theory of Yin Yang, if y'all are familiar with that, right? That's another theory we use. Day has to be balanced with night, winter with summer, wet with dry, up with down, male with female, all these things have to be balanced. So this is one of the ways we keep those things balanced. So water, what does water control?
Fire.
Fire, makes sense. Fire. What does fire control? Metal, does that make sense? Fire melts metal, right? Metal, what does metal control? Wood, with an axe. You can chop through wood with an axe or a pick or something, right? Wood, what does wood control? This one's earth. So think of that as like the roots of trees holding earth together. When you don't have roots of trees, we have mudslides and things like that. The earth no longer has structure to it. So hold it together that way. And then earth controls water. How so? Anybody? You guys haven't been in school in a while. So the banks of a river, right? Keeping that in control or not, or the ability of the earth to actually absorb water. So if we've got, like the idea of a sponge, right? If you've got a sponge, it's kind of funny how if you've got a dry sponge, think of the sponge as earth. A dry sponge doesn't absorb water as well as a wet sponge does. Isn't that weird? That's actually, I use that in Chinese medicine when I'm working on earth issues. Oh, I think my phone's gonna die. When I'm working on earth issues and the absorptive capacity of the earth in the body. But so earth governs water both by creating the banks of lakes and streams and things, but also by absorbing the rain and siphoning the rain off in that way. So just a couple of the ways that these elements all start to interact with each other. So then if we break it down just into the purposes of tonight, we've got autumn, which is, we're going to talk about autumn and winter, right? So autumn is the season of metal. Winter is the season of water. So when we talk about autumn and we talk about winter, I'm going back one slide, we're not just talking about we're talking about metal and water, and then we're not just talking about the seasons, because there's all these other things associated with them that we're going to discuss. So autumn is about grief. It's related to the skin. It's connected to your nose. It's connected to your lungs and your large intestine. It has to do with dryness. So all of these things come to play in autumn in terms of our physiology, in terms of our emotions, in terms of our spirit, in terms of how we're relating to people and to our lives. And in winter, same. So winter has an emotion, it's fear. Or metal has an emotion, I should say, which is fear. It's related to bones. Its taste is salty. It's connected to the ears. We need to be listening a lot in the quiet of winter, which we don't often do, especially in our culture. We're going to talk about that. It's cold. It's intended to be cold. It needs to balance out the heat of summer. It's connected to the bladder and kidney. So what does actually honoring the winter have to do with making sure that you've got a strong kidney organ and a kidney energetic as you go through life? Well, it has a lot to do with that. Kidney is like the most important thing in you in terms of how gracefully you age and what your old age looks like and how much energy you have in general. With me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so autumn. I feel like we've just passed this phase in the past week here, right, of autumn in Maine. I'm going to take a sip of water. So some of you in the clinic, because it's been autumn, you've heard me tell my autumn story. Because what happens in autumn is things are slowing down, but we feel like they shouldn't be. We have a hard time culturally in general, and I think a hard time especially in Maine, letting go of summer. It's so short. So I often have people coming into the clinic feeling, labeling themselves as being tired or being depressed, or and then there's physical things that come up too, because lung things for sure come up in autumn, but it's more being tired and depressed, and we do take some time to reframe it. Maybe that's what's true, but maybe this is just that we need to consider the season that we're moving into, and that the pace of things is actually changing, and that's okay. So if we think about autumn, first we got to go back to summer. So summer, everything is in full bloom, right? Like trees are blooming, leaves are up, they've got their branched extended leaves out, collecting all of the energy from the sun, literally feeding the tree, bringing it down, turning it into more of itself, right? Humans are doing that too, right? We're out, we're connecting, we're socializing, we're outside all day long, we're at the beach. No one wants to be indoors in the summertime, right? So think of the leaves, because we're going to come back to those. They are absolutely vital to the success of that tree in the summer, right? Or the plant. But then autumn comes, and I love playing, and the leaves start to fall. And the trees don't care. They just let the leaves go. It's not a big deal. They're not like pained about the leaf falling, right? And I like to paint the picture of, if we had a snow now, when the leaves are still on the trees. Number one, it tends to be a heavy snow, so that messes with my example a little bit. But what tends to happen with early wet snows when the leaves aren't off the trees yet? The leaves ice over. What else happens? They break, yeah. So it's heavier because the leaves are catching the snow. So the leaves that were the life-giving aspect of the trees in the summer, or the life-collecting aspect, they were totally vital to the health of that tree in the summertime. If the tree doesn't drop them appropriately, because it's appropriate to do so in the fall, the very thing that gave them life, the leaves, become a liability. And now the tree is susceptible to damage because it hasn't dropped what it was time to let go of. So that's part of this metaphor that I really love. It's like autumn is a time to be doing internally, mentally, emotionally, even in terms of doing like a big autumn clean of our house, the same thing that we're seeing happen outside, just letting go of what no longer serves us. And it doesn't have to be something that never served us. It can be something that served us incredibly well for a very, very long time, or for the summer, like the leaves on the trees, right? They're not dropping something that wasn't ever useful. They were super useful, and then it's time to let them go. So that's a really essential part of the nature of autumn. And then the additional piece of that is those leaves fall, they land on the ground, they turn into more earth, and they literally become what turns into more of the tree so that it can transform into its next version of itself come spring, right? Like in that next part of the cycle. So if we don't let go what no longer serves us, what's time is up, it becomes a liability, and we forget that in letting it go, it actually then becomes fodder for more of us. The release of it allows us to step into a new version. That's a lot of the theme of autumn. So if we think about it, it's a time of harvest. We're harvesting everything from the summer. Everything we planted in the spring that came to full life, full bloom in the summertime, and now we're harvesting that. We're reaping the benefits of that harvest, but then we're being discerning about what aspects of that we need to keep to get us through the winter. We're storing, we're stocking up. But again, I like to think that we're stocking up. Imagine, mentally, physically, emotionally, we do have dark, cold winters here. What's non-essential that might drag you down through the winter that you don't want to have to carry? Because it does take more energy to be a human in Maine in the winter, in all ways. So what can you let go of from the harvest? Be grateful for the harvest. Thank it for its service, and then move on. There's also, I think this is true, y'all could argue me, but the crispness of autumn, it's specific to autumn, right? Like those dry days in spring or summer, they're beautiful, but it's just not the same as that kind of crisp, clear, like discerning air that happens in autumn. Part of it, I think, comes from just in contrast to the humidity of summertime, but part of it is just essentially autumn, and it speaks to aspects of metal that we'll talk more about. And with that crispness, I think it's like crisp and it's clear and it's discerning, and we talk about we go outside and we take deep breaths in autumn that we just don't take or don't talk about taking in the summertime, right? And then, like we've talked about, everything's descending externally, and things are descending and moving internally in your body as well. And there's ways that we can both support that and protect our body during that time. And this is why, we all know it, 50 degrees in October is not the same as 50 degrees in February, right? 50 degrees in February, everybody is in shorts or close to it. And that's because in February let me make sure I get this right. We've got more warmth built up internally because of the winter, right? So this time of year, we're much more exposed. That cold hits, and it feels really cold because we're much more at the surface and we're slowly descending. Just like the sap is descending in the trees, the same thing is happening energetically. Okay, so some of the characteristics of metal. Anything else that you guys think of for autumn in terms of just how it feels that I didn't mention? No?
Sometimes I feel like it's a beginning. It's like a new year for me. January, I feel like
it's funny, I have a New Year's slide that you might have been at that lecture that I gave that had a New Year's slide there for a while. Well, it is a new year in some traditions. Is anyone here Jewish? No, isn't it when's the new year?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, in the fall.
It's in the fall? Yeah. And there's one other example of it being a new year that I'm forgetting now.
The academic calendar.
Right, going back to school, there's that whole thing. So I think that's a really useful way of thinking about it too. Yeah. And in some ways, as I think you'll see as we go through it, winter, In autumn, we go down and in, and then in winter, we're just like waiting. But it's almost as if that's already started. Like that process of waiting for the rebirth of spring, it's like it started in autumn. So, yeah. So the emotion is grief, and that makes sense, right? We're letting go, the leaves are falling, we're letting go of the abundance of summer, letting go of that connection, sort of letting go of the social aspect of summer, getting back more into the autumn routines, which some people crave, but also there's a grief process there. The direction is west. So it's toward the setting of the sun. So it's about completing a cycle, not just in terms of the seasons, but in terms of the day. So metal as an element relates to autumn, but also to dusk. And it can relate to the season of our lives. So toward the end of our youth is our spring, and that's wood. And the older part of our lives is metal. Weeping makes sense, but I like to think of it both to be weeping out of grief, but also out of inspiration, which we touched on a little bit in terms of like that clarity and discernment of autumn. We'll talk about a little bit more. Color is white. The climate is dry. This comes up a lot in clinic, dry lung stuff. There's a lot of lung stuff in autumn, and we attribute it to back to school, but I would argue it would happen anyway, because it's the nature of the season. It's about the nose, and it's about the lung, and it's about dryness, and it's about, they're all connected. It's about grief, and the grief is related to the lung, and school doesn't help, I'm sure, but I think it would happen anyway. The virtue, so like the attitude of it is righteousness, but the best kind. Like what is true, what is good, what is real, what is essential? What do I need to bring with me through the winter? What's the best part of this summertime harvest? What do I need to carry? What do I let go? Metal, we can talk about metal in alignment, any of these elements in alignment and out of alignment, and this is relevant clinically when I'm doing my work, but metal out of alignment looks like fanaticism, looks like someone who is so sure that they are right and everybody else is wrong, as opposed to someone who's like connected in both ways, grounded in the earth, and has a connection to high ideals and has wisdom, right? That's the virtue. Nose and smell are the organs, and then, or the sensory organs, and then the lung and large intestine are the body organs. Who's had lung stuff so far this fall? Lung issues? No? Yeah. Oops, wrong way. So metal seeks perfection of form and function. It's this crispness, this discernment, that clarity. It desires justice. So an example would be the Supreme Court, like this higher justice. What lives and what dies? What is truth? It evokes awe and reverence and inspiration. And inspiration connects to the lung. We're going to circle back around to this. It's about a connection to something greater. Mountain is a really good symbol of metal. So again, ground up mountains made of rock and metal, like we talked about metal, earth engenders metal, so metal's in there. But being really firmly, deeply grounded, and at the same time reaching up toward the high, toward inspiration, toward higher truth, toward purity in a way that's grounded, not fanatical, not zealotry. That's metal out of alignment. And then, just practically speaking, it expands and contracts. So I think this is true. I am not a railroad engineer, but I think that it's true that when they line up those tracks, they've got to make sure they stay straight, but also take into consideration the fact that that metal is going to expand and contract. So the trains don't go off the track, right? So what else expands and contracts in the body on a regular basis? The lung, which is related to metal, right? So our inhaling and exhaling is this expansion and contraction. Lung and large intestine. More theory you don't need to know, but there's all kinds of ways that organs and channels are related in Chinese medicine that's useful when you are sick and are asking someone like me to help you. Lung and large intestine are one of those pairs. They are both metal. They are both very exterior, directly connected to the outside. They can be considered our armor in some ways because of that exterior aspect. And they both have to do with receiving and letting go. So in every moment, whether we're thinking about it or not, we're receiving with our breath, and then we're letting go with our out breath. That happens whether we're thinking about it or not. It also happens under our control, right? Which makes the lung and the breath really special in a lot of ways, because it's this essential functioning in the body that happens no matter what, no matter whether we're thinking about it, but that we also can control. And then, of course, the receiving and the letting go of the large intestine. We all really want our large intestine to let things go, right? It's a real problem if it doesn't let things go. And we're going to talk more about that. So we know about the lung in general: respiration, gas exchange, gets us oxygen, there's that exchange, so it brings oxygen in, takes waste products out, right? So all of the time, whether we're thinking about it or not, the lung is deciding for us, what do I keep and what do I let go? What's time to give back out to then exhale back out into the world? Inhalation, exhalation, receiving and letting go. The nature of the autumn. So inhalation, exhalation, we can also call inspiration and expiration. And that also speaks to the physical functioning of the lung, but also to the emotional and the spiritual functioning of the lung and of metal. So it's the organ of inspiration. What inspires you? This is a great season to be thinking about that. What's essential? Like, certainly, if we're looking at what's essential moving into winter, it's got to be what inspires you. Nobody wants to go into a winter uninspired. Right? But we do. So as we exhale, what no longer serves you? What can you let expire? What is it, like, what are you trying to pump the lifeblood into, but it's just time to let it go. It's time to let it die. Like I said, our body is making this choice in every breath. Couple ways to think about it: focusing on the exhale, the inhale follows. So anyone do breath of fire? I'm not like a yoga teacher. I don't know all the pranayama, but does anyone do breath of fire in yoga? Raise your hand. So you exhale out and the inhale comes. You could do that indefinitely. It doesn't work the other way around in the same way, but you force the air out and the inhale comes. And so I like to encourage people to use that as a metaphor. If you're struggling for, I don't know what I want, I don't know where to go, I don't know what to do, let something go. Do the exhalation, drop the stuff that's not working, unburden yourself a little bit, and then just have faith that inspiration is going to come. That's how our physiology works. So there's no reason that's not how our sort of emotional, spiritual physiology works. And then I also just like the idea, where am I going? Forward. Nope. It's kind of silly, but if you're climbing a ladder, if you want to reach higher, you have to let go of a rung. You've probably heard that before, but the first time I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, mind blown. Right? So we have to let go of something as we're reaching toward the next thing, as we're reaching toward the inspiration. Or leap and the net will appear, right? We just have to let go sometimes. The lung is doing that for us all the time. It's amazing. So a healthy lung is balancing between yielding and demanding, between giving and taking, between holding and letting go, right? That's a healthy functioning lung as a physical organ. If we're talking about the organ system that's imbalanced, and not just the physical organ, that's what we're doing in life too. It's healthy, giving and taking, right? If we've got an imbalanced lung system, we already talked about fanaticism, zealotry, you are so sure that you are right and everybody else is wrong and everyone else has to think the way you do. There's no sense of being grounded and inspired in that zealotry even. So these people, order and discipline are rigidly maintained, so you can't, you have to stick to your rules. Emotions are under tight control. You're really inflexible with your rules and routine. There's no give and take. There's no expansion and contraction. And then of course physically, lung stuff, right? Infections, allergies, asthma, heaviness of the chest, all these things come up in autumn more. Again, I would argue partly because it's the season of the lung and school, but then in general. So large intestine, also an organ of elimination. Also has expansion and contraction in terms of peristalsis, and that being how things move through, right? this is a little bit of gobbledygook, but what I wanted you to take from it is this connection between lung and large intestine. We actually can't take a deep breath if we're constipated. I won't make you raise your hands, but I bet some of you have experienced this, where like you're so backed up and you can't breathe and it's so uncomfortable and you just want to drop the bottom out and then, I can breathe now, right? You know it's true. So that's one of their connections, and that has to do, again, if we step out of the physical but into the emotional, the spiritual, we've got to let go from the bottom to be able to be inspired at the top. So then, back. Sorry for the swear, but like, are you letting your stuff, should I say stuff? Are you letting your stuff go, right? So in the season of metal, the lung is especially at risk as an organ. It's also especially available to be supported and worked on. So if you've got chronic lung issues, this is a great time to be working on them. Issues with metal that you have in general are bound to arise. So much grief comes through my clinic in autumn. People have a lot of actual loss in autumn, it seems like, in lives, but then it comes up for people in autumn. It's a great time to be digging deeper into those kinds of issues. So part of what we're going to talk about tonight is how to take extra special care of your lung because it's susceptible, how to protect it as much as possible, and then things that we can do if any of the spiritual emotional stuff speaks to you to take better care of that or move through some stuff related to the lung. And ideally transform them or get them to a place where they're at a different place next year than you were this year or last year. Yeah? And then I like this. The direction of the metal element corresponds to the west, the setting sun, and the end of the day. Entering into darkness in the daily cycle and autumn in the seasonal cycle reflects the inevitability of loss of light, warmth, and life itself. So it's inevitable, right? But this state of loss is counterbalanced within the metal element by its power to find value and worth, to accept what is, and to bring inspiration through the breath and connection to the heavenly chi. So it's about loss, but always balanced with this inspiration. Metal is like my favorite. Metal and water. I love metal and water. Okay, we good? Questions? Useful?
Yes.
New? Things you've heard before? Not as much, a little bit? From someone other than me? Okay, so what do? How do we align with this? Declutter, materially and mentally. Like, actually do it. You can all just sit here and go, oh, that's a good idea. But how about, like, go home? If this one speaks to you, go home and get a journal. Like, actually run through some of these things. Are you feeling burdened by relationships, by hurts, by grief? Who is that it's time to move on from? Who or what is essential? Who or what is not? Who or what weighs you down? What feels like it's sapping your essential strength? We're going to get a little bit more into your essential strength when we talk about water, but like, what is, we'll leave it at that for now. What's out of alignment? What do you know is true for you? If you're the mountain and you're firmly grounded and you're reaching up to your highest peak, what do you know is true? And what is getting in the way of that? What is holding you back? What are you not aligning with? Seeking inspiration, letting yourself be inspired. Definitely breathing outside in autumn, really good idea. Strengthens the lung, it increases the energy, stills the mind, lifts the spirits, all the things that we need. And like I said, I feel like I think people take more deep breaths in autumn, like, that air feels so good, doesn't it? The role of exhalation, the role of letting your shit go in the interest of inspiration. Just breathing, just finding a beautiful spot and breathing. And then having some faith that it will come, right? That's part of it. And remembering that this is what I love. You have the energetic inertia of a planet behind you and trying to do some of this stuff in this season. You're not doing it alone. The trees are doing it with you. I prescribe for people to go and just sit and watch the leaves fall when they need to do some of this work. Right, what I just said. Use autumn's imagery to support you in it. The trees don't care that they're dropping their leaves. They're just dropping them, and they know that they're going to get them back next year. New ones. Fancy that. Whole new set of leaves. So in terms of physical activity, we mentioned breathing once or twice. So if you've felt inclined toward doing more breathing, more breath work, more breathing exercises, this would be a great time to bring some of that on. Deep belly breathing, if you have questions about that, I'm happy to talk to you afterwards, or you can email me. Also, focusing on our breath more. This is really a transitional season. We're transitioning from the hustle bustle of summer into the deep quiet of winter. So it's a season of actively slowing down. Winter is stillness. Autumn is slowing down. Spring is speeding up. Summer is go! So focusing on breathing helps us with the slowing down aspect, which takes some time. It's a process. And I think we all feel that too. And any exercise that focuses on coordinating your breath and movement, again, to try to slow down and try to connect your breath to your body. Food stuff. There's so much to talk about. So please implement some of this and also take it with a grain of salt. It's super contextual. Everybody and their uncle has opinions on food these days, right? Chinese medicine has a lot of ideas about food. I'm sharing some of the basics as it relates to the season. It may or may not apply to you as it relates to your individual humanness. So if you've got health issues going on, there may be other things we need to talk about in terms of food, but these are the basics. And I've labeled them in terms like 101, 201, 301, 401. Do the basics first. If you're not there, start there, okay? So in autumn, as we talked about, things are drying, things are cooling, things are moving inward, okay? So our food and our cooking should be focusing on moistening, making sure we're not getting too dry, focused on warming because we're starting to get cool outside, and focusing on astringing, in other words, kind of keeping things inward, not dispersing. Like I don't particularly want to break a sweat for you in autumn. That's the opposite of what we're going for. So if you've been to see me in clinic, you all have heard this. I don't actually harp on the eating seasonally so much, but man, do we harp on cooking your food in Chinese medicine, right? Whether you see me or someone else. It's so important. The short version is it's just so important in terms of supporting your digestion in general, always, and it becomes increasingly important as the season is cooler and we really need to be warming ourselves from the inside out. Those of us who practice Chinese medicine are thrilled when people switch from a standard American diet to smoothies and salads, sort of, because that seems to be the trend lately for this is what's healthy. A smoothie and a salad is inherently healthy. So that's like a good shift, but there's a lot more we need to do in terms of making sure you're getting nutrition properly in a way that's going to support your digestion over the long term. And then eating seasonally. So really thinking about that when you go to the store. This is not the season for asparagus. Asparagus happens in the spring. It's not really the season for strawberries either. So this is a season of root vegetables and squashes and apples and pears and to a certain extent like some of our dark leafy greens because we can grow those over the winter. Obviously we're going to eat other things, but when you're starting to think about how to align eating with the seasons in a way that's going to support my health the most through the season, you really want to be thinking about eating seasonally. And you can, it's dense nutrition. Imagine a plate full of beets and butternut squash and sweet potatoes and maybe some cauliflower compared to a plate of, romaine lettuce and watercress or something. They're just, they don't have the same density. And one is appropriate for the summer when you're not trying to work to stay warm. Or for winter at the equator, where we're not talking about the same winter, but we're talking about winter in Maine. So we need nutrient density. Okay, so once you've got that covered, next step. This should be 101B, probably, because we're still talking about warm foods, okay? So please limit your raw food. If any of you want me to expand on this later, you can ask. And remember, feel free to ask questions now too. Avoid cold beverages. Think of your digestion as a fire. It's a furnace. So when you're dumping cold and you're dumping raw on it, it's like pouring cold water on a furnace that's trying to literally burn the food that you're putting in your body to make more of you. Remember, that's what's happening. The food that you're eating is literally creating more of you. That's it. Your food, your water, your breath, and your your shen, your spirit. That's what makes more of you. So we really have to support it and not just douse it with cold water or cold food. Ideally, we're cooking for longer times at lower temperatures. So that just means the longer we cook something, the more heat we actually infuse into the food itself. I'm trying to think of a good example. Like imagine broccoli, steaming broccoli, what that tastes like versus roasted broccoli. If we're talking about like the warmth and the density of it. I don't know if you can feel that nuance, but they're different. So we're trying with our cooking methods to just get more of that warmth into the food because your body needs more warmth. And then we're doing it at lower temperatures, so it takes more time. So we're not drying it out because again, autumn is a season of dryness. So we don't want to be eating a ton of dry stuff when we get dry in other ways. Does that make sense? Okay. So think of soups and stews and roasting instead of our go-to smoothies and salads. Next level, we want to support moisture. So basic hydration, just drink enough water. As a caveat, it's also really popular to force water. Like that's sort of like mainstream health is just like drink so much water. Yes, we all need to be hydrated. And of course now I'm going to take an opportunity to take a drink. And in Chinese medicine, I'm really interested in how thirsty you are or how thirsty you aren't. And anyone who's come to see me knows I've asked that question at your intake because it tells me a lot. So stay hydrated, but also just for you, this is one of those get curious moments, pay attention to how thirsty you are, rather than just drinking an amount that someone told you were supposed to drink. Some people are never thirsty, and if you've got other issues going on in your body, the fact that you're never thirsty gives someone like me a lot of information to go on. And we don't need to drink as much in the winter. We're not sweating as much. Frankly, I think a lot of the hydration in our culture comes from people not eating enough vegetables. If you're actually eating plenty of vegetables, I promise you, you won't be as thirsty because you're getting your water through your food as opposed to drinking a lot of refined carbohydrate and then having to add the water. So play with that. So we can think of lubricating foods. This is probably maybe a new way to think of foods. But if you imagine a plate of spinach or okra, which is not seasonal necessarily, but okra is slimy. Some people love it for the slime. Not the fried okra, but other kinds of it, right? It's slimy. So it literally lubricates us from the inside out. Spinach is kind of the same. Persimmons, right? That's got that slimy bit. Almonds and seeds, because of the oils, are lubricating in some ways that people need. So sometimes we need to think of foods that are actually themselves going to add some more water to our system. And then apples and pears specifically, we talk about apples and pears being related to autumn. I mean, partly they're ripe in autumn, but because their flesh is white. Remember, white's the color of metal. So it's fun when all these things come back around and relate, right? I'll send all of you in the handout. There's a great recipe for Asian pears. You all know Asian pears? These guys? They're hard. They don't get soft like a regular pear. They're crisp, and they've got lots of juicy water hydration in them. So steaming that with some honey is great. Not when you're sick, but when people get like just a dry cough, we call it a lung dryness cough that they can't get at. And Asian pear is amazing for that. And then the last level, this starts to talk about the flavors of food and how to use those. This is like, just stop smoothies first, right? Like, don't even think about this if you're still eating smoothies. But we talk about the moving inward. So with the other thing, we're countering the dryness with hydration. We're countering the cold temperature with warming foods and warming cooking methods. We actually don't want to counter the moving inward. That would be dispersing. And I already said we want to support that because the body, like the trees, everything's moving inward, and that's going to help protect you and keep you healthier and more contained, less susceptible to what's happening out here through the autumn and winter, which is what we need. We need to be a little bit more protected this time of year. So sour foods, they do, for one, we all know sour like makes your salivary glands squirt, right? So sour, it creates moisture in the body. That's the energetic of it. but it also kind of contracts and astringes things. So some ideas are tofu, sourdough breads, your sauerkraut, vinegar, olives, and then we don't need to do the typical American thing of oh, if a little is good, then I should just have a whole plate full of sour stuff. No. Think about this as condiments or just flavors that you might add to your meal, not an entire plate of olives for dinner, right? The lung is referred to as the delicate organ, so we need to protect it. Moving on from food now. Really just wear your scarves. This is one of those things where you're I know, but it makes such a difference. And I have always been a scarf person. A couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, I got a cough that was the worst cough I had ever had in my life. It's the first time that I got sick, and I still don't think I completely recovered. So if any of you have had that experience of always recovering from stuff, and then you have the first thing where you're wow, I think my body's actually different now and forever. She's putting her scarf on. Good timing. So our lungs need extra protection. They're literally right here. We forget that too. We forget that we're literally made of the food that we eat. We forget that. We say that, but we don't actually think it all the way through. I know. But they're right here, your lungs. Everyone touch your chest. They're right there. And they're, if they stopped working, you would not make it out of here tonight, right? If they decide to stop working right now. So there's just a thin layer of skin and flesh. There's not that much there. So if you're prone to lung stuff, you got to take that seriously. You got to wear your scarves. You got to wear undershirts. We'll get to that more when we talk about kidney. But really take it seriously to protect this. Or if you feel like you're coming down with something, we're partly protecting the lung organ, but in Chinese medicine there's also a lot of acupuncture points that are the access point to kind of catch cold, what we would call, the language we use, we would call it a wind invasion, but you're kind of catching things from the exterior. Not germs, but catching a chill, and all of that is available up here. So I don't go anywhere after Labor Day without a scarf. So no joke, scarves. And then wet hair. Has anyone in here heard me talk about wet hair? No, you haven't? So please don't leave your house with wet hair. It turns into cold, and it transmits cold right into your head and right into these points that are susceptible. And often in women, it's cold dripping on your neck. So what I think is hilarious is I actually took this picture from an article that was debunking the idea that your kids were going to get sick if they went out with wet hair. But as is typical, they were looking at that as a direct cause and effect. Every time you go out with wet hair, you're going to get. Of course, we need germs too, right? We're not saying germ theory doesn't exist, but we're saying it takes, there's multiple things that are contributing to us getting sick. And we want to protect ourselves as best as possible. I would actually argue of these two, I'd rather the kid go out with wet hair than the adult. Because the kid's got more reserves. He's in his springtime. He's got more energy. He's got more yang. He's got more heat. Kids go out with jackets all the time, right? So he's going to be okay. We actually know there are studies that you've probably seen this. Kids in Russia who still go out and are exposed to cold on a regular basis, real cold in the winter, they fare much better in terms of immunity. So it's okay to challenge the kid. As we get older, less okay. We have less reserves. We have less of that warmth. So for the love, please, after Labor Day, don't go out with wet hair. I actually had a patient show up late the other day, and she was, I don't think it's someone who was here, it happened twice. And she was like, it was either be late or dry my hair. Wow. And so I think one of them chose to be late and one of them chose to dry her hair. So, okay. All right, so that's kind of it for autumn for now. How are we doing? Questions? Helpful? Takeaways? Turn to your neighbor real fast and give them one takeaway from something that you think you can do differently for autumn. Okay, you have some ideas? Anybody want to share their favorite takeaway? Anybody? Anybody? Someone's going to share a favorite takeaway before we go on to winter. Yes?
Soup for breakfast.
Yeah, soup for breakfast. Does anyone eat soup for breakfast? Yeah. Like most other parts of the world have some kind of soup for breakfast. It's one of the hardest things in a clinic like mine to get the average American off of what we think of as a typical breakfast. Okay, moving on to winter. Are we ready?
Yes.
Winter. We're going to try not to do this. Like actually or metaphorically. So what's the element of winter? Who remembers? Water. So I was talking someone through autumn and winter in clinic the other day. I said, so when you look outside in winter, I think it was, when you look outside in winter, like, what are the trees doing? And she wasn't having a great day, and she was like, they're frozen and dead. Like, okay, that's the problem, right? Like, if we're approaching winter as just being frozen and dead, it's a tough season to endure if that's the only thing that we're thinking about it. So another way is it's resting and replenishing. It's easier to think of winter that way, I think, when there's beautiful snow on the ground than when we have like just the, you know, when it just looks frozen and dead. But this is the major difference, right? It's not frozen and dead, it's resting. And resting is so, so, so important. If you go back to that chart, we have to have the resting. We can't have that spring. We can't have youth. We can't have growth. We can't have transformation if we don't have the rest that comes before it. So that's what winter is about. We also celebrate the light in different ways in winter. And so that speaks to things that we'll get to. Who knows what this is? Yin Yang. Yin Yang. I don't know how it got to be Yin Yang, but yeah, Yin Yang, Yin Yang. And so this is Yin, this is Yang. And then one of the ideas is we always have one and the other. They're inseparable. When they separate, we die, right? So they're not always in perfect balance. In fact, they rarely are, but they balance each other in the way that it does here, right? This is actually upside down. The yin should be on the bottom, but that fire of yang and the inside of yin. So yin is our winter. Yin is our dark. Yin is our still. Yin is our womb, right? But it's always got that little fire in there. The fire of life is not gone. The trees, if we go back, they're not dead at all. It's just that fire has descended, and for good reason. So I like to think, you know, part of the lights and it's a celebration of light, and it's the shortest day of the year, and the year is going to expand again. But also this like light of life that's still active deep, deep in the underground. The yang is still in the yin. So more like this. I think that's the way to think about winter. I don't know what this guy is. So maybe without the ghost. Okay, so water. The emotion is fear. And that'll come up down the road, but I mean, there's fear of water. Water is calming and soothing. It's also vast and deep and unknown, and we can drown. The direction is north. The sound is moaning. I think of that in terms of like moaning, groaning, creaky, coldness aspect. Color is black. Climate is cold. That makes sense. Flavor is salty. So salty water. It's related to the kidney. So like kidney function and sort of salt metabolism. The virtue is wisdom. So who remembers the virtue of the lung?
Was it expansion?
Well, inspiration is part of the lung, yeah. I mean, the way we name the virtue is righteous, like righteous, right?
Oh, right.
In the best way, right? So water is wisdom. It's like where we all go back to, where we all come from, the beginning and the end. It's related to the ears. So listening is a big deal in winter. And then the organs are the kidney and the bladder, which relate to water in the body as well, right? We all know how important water is. Lots of people can tell you it better than I can, but there's a lot of it on the earth. There's a lot of it in our bodies. It matters quite a bit, right? So it takes on the form of its container. No matter what we put it in, there it is, different from any of the other elements. It's mutable, it changes in our environment, right? We all know this. This is what makes Earth what it is, that we have it in all these forms. And it's yielding yet strong. So, like it made that, right? And it yielded, it curved. It didn't just insist that its way had to be the way, and yet its way was ultimately the way, because it made the canyon. So both of those things are true of water. And both of those things are true of water in us. So in terms of the abundance of water, everything that nourishes, protects, lubricates, grows, or otherwise moves within us does so through the grace of the water element. Have to have water. Water in the way that it fits into any container, the way that it changes shape and form, right? Vapor to ice to liquid. That's our own ability to respond differently and appropriately depending on the situation. And then this yielding strength. We can get quiet and still be really freaking powerful. Make canyons and stuff. So it's pretty big stuff. And it speaks to how important it might be to honor the water in us and maybe the organs in us that relate to something as big and important as water. So kidney is the organ. We've got what it does in Western medicine, which is also what it does in Chinese medicine. Then it also governs, so in Chinese medicine we've got like the actual organ and then the organ system. So there's the organ itself, and we, for the most part, have like a one-to-one correlation with Western medicine, but then it governs systems of things. So kidney also governs teeth and bones and bone marrow and the skeletal structure and the spinal cord, brain function, memory, intelligence, reason, all related to kidney. All of these things, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I get excited. All of these things also we think of as kind of, they deteriorate as we age, right? Our bones, our skeletons, our teeth, our memory, these are all things we think of as declining as we age. We sort of all expect it. Governed by the kidney. So not necessarily the kidney organ doesn't mean something's wrong with your organ, but the kidney energetic governs that whole arc of life. So it may be important to protect that kidney energetic, given that it's going to govern how well we age as we move through our years. So the kidneys in Chinese medicine, they are the root of life. No big deal. The fundamental source and root of all energy in the body. No big deal. So the kidneys have their own energy, but then they are the root of like all of the other. So we talk about spleen and heart and lung and all the functions those things have. But the root energy has to be strong for any of those other things to be strong. Kidneys are at the foundation of all of it. They store what we call the essence or the Jing. It's the ancestral chi. A loose correlate would be DNA, right? Like they store what we've been given, what's been passed down to us. They're what we come in with, what's been passed down to us. But then part of the kidney is also how we're able to express it in the world. So the strength of our will in terms of our own self-expression and our ability to pursue that self-expression, that all comes from the kidney. Not forcing it, but letting it emerge. And we'll get to that too, but forcing it taxes the kidney, which is like, oh, so what we love to do in the West. Letting it emerge, flowing with the water, being in the stream, being in the flow, right? We talk about that. When you're feeling full of yourself and in the flow, you're riding the kidney energetic. When you're just forcing your will and forcing your ambition and forcing your whatever, not that you can't be ambitious, but are you being ambitious this way? Or are you demanding it? The demands tax the kidney, burning the candle at both ends. I found this quote, I think yesterday, I love it. E. Cummings, it takes courage to grow up into who you really are. So that's part of the kidney energetic. It's one aspect of it, having that courage to actually be who you are. Then I love how the lung, the metal, feeds into this. Like, what's essential? Who am I? What is truth? What do I want to be in the world? What does it mean to be in the world? And then have that then translate into having the energy to actually do that and having the courage to do that. as the kidneys are our finest and deepest energy stores, we want to think about them like living off the interest, not the principle. In our culture, we tend to live off the principle. We're just like burning our kidney jing, like coffee and then sugar and then whatever other energy boosting drinks, and then we're not sleeping, and then you come to me and you're like, I don't know why I'm so tired. I do it too. So what we want to do, ideally, is be in our best health so that our kidneys are just kind of giving us natural energy and we're living off of that, and we're not taxing the piece that governs the arc of our maturity through life. If we're taxing that piece, that's when we get premature aging. Because it governs maturation, growth, life. It's also about conception, about fertility. There can be, it's why our fertility declines as we age, and there can be kidney issues involved in fertility issues in younger people. Not always, but can be. So when it's balanced, we have a healthy fear, right? Fear isn't bad, but it's appropriate. It's allowing us to be ready and capable to face life's challenges. Physically, we're procreating, our fertility is good, we're growing, we're developing, we're maturing, we're aging gracefully. We have this resolve. We have this inner sense of self, and we have this will that we can go on through the dark times. Winter, as a metaphor for that, or just dark times in our lives. And then this balance of calm and force that are working at the same time, where we can be forceful in this quiet way, not forceful in this like over the top, hit you with a hammer kind of way. Imbalanced kidney becomes a pathological phobia. So instead of having a fear that's useful, phobias. Now, this I would argue is not about individual phobias. That's something different. This is more about somebody who is just scared of life, right? Scared, they've got cold feet, they're frozen in place, they're frozen with fear. Something in them, there's kidney water, but there's also kidney fire. That's theory we don't need to get into, but the kidneys can feel frozen. They're lacking a spark of life. It's more that kind of fear and phobia, and less like being afraid of spiders. I'm not worried about your kidney if you're afraid of spiders or flying or something necessarily. Running ourselves ragged, which we all do so well in our culture, is both a cause and effect of a water imbalance and a kidney imbalance. So they feed one another. And keeping ourselves distracted with busy, also kind of a cause and effect. We're too busy, we can't listen, but we don't want to listen, so we're going to make ourselves busy. Like, oh shit, what am I going to hear if I get quiet? Like, I don't think I like my life, I'm just going to keep living it. So all of this is especially susceptible if we're not honoring water or resting in general, but especially in winter. Like, I'm not nearly as, summer's not the time to rest. Like, take a nap on the beach maybe, right? But we have, like, there's more energy of the earth kind of helping us go. We can all feel that, right? In the winter, we try to keep doing this because that's what our culture does, but it doesn't match. And then people feel like they're tired because they want to go to bed, or something's the matter because they want to go to bed at 8:30 or 9. It's like, well, it's been dark for 5 hours. Go to bed. It's okay. Everything else is asleep. Yeah, so our lifestyle basically lends itself to chronic kidney depletion. When we talk about kidneys, you know, if you're thinking about Western medicine or functional medicine, and we're talking about cortisol levels and adrenals, adrenal fatigue, right? They're correlates. We just have a different language in terms of how we talk about them, and a different way of approaching how to build them up. So overwork, overcommitment, overconsumption of stimulants, go, 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 go. So like we've said, the kidney is especially at risk in the winter, but I like to think of it, I was thinking about this as I wrote this slide. I actually think in the autumn, the lungs are especially at risk. I don't think of the kidneys as being especially at risk. It's not like I see more kidney issues, right? It's just that I see it's more dramatic how we're not honoring resting. We're not honoring them in the winter. So they're much more available to be nourished in the winter. Partly, I think we all have an excuse to nourish them, right? Like the darkness is an excuse to be more quiet. So if we need an excuse, it's available to us in the winter to do that. So again, like we said before, how do we take extra special care of the kidney? And it would help us if we can recognize that winter is actually intended for resting and pausing. It's okay if you don't want to go out. It's okay if you feel a little bit fatigued. It's okay if you want to sleep more or feel more sleepy. It's okay if you put on a little bit of weight. Like, all of these things are totally normal in winter. That's not to deny if there's a problem, if like there's other things leading to your fatigue, we need to address that. But we also really need to consider these seasonal fluctuations are normal, and we're pathologizing them all over the place in our culture because we feel like we all should be kind of going at this summertime fiery yang level all the time. And I would argue too, so it's different in different places. Like, I lived in Texas for 10 years, and the seasons they fluctuate some, but they don't fluctuate nearly as much. But people also aren't as insane in the summer with their go as we are, because they're not so desperate for it. It's gonna go. Like, we hide in the summer there because it's hot. So it's like they don't need as much of the rest in the winter because they're not as insane about the summer. Whereas here, we just get nutty about summer, and I think we need it even more to recover. Okay. So what do we do? Cultivate the spirit of water. So this is great as the holidays come up. How can you go with the flow? Right? I know I have to work on that as the holidays come up. So how can you be fluid and adaptable? How can you develop trust? I mean, both in the context of family and the holidays, but also in this idea of winter and darkness. Can you be comfortable in the quiet and the stillness? Can you sit quietly with no screens and no book and no music and not freak out just by sitting quietly with yourself? Or can you just sit with how uncomfortable that is and just get curious? My favorite phrase. Oh, that's interesting. I do not like this. And then practice that yielding, right? But I love, it's the yielding that has the power. It's the finding the place to yield. Do you know that, and this is just the Tao, but there's a story of a butcher, and he's had one knife. There's probably a bigger story to it, but I love this idea. He's had one knife, and he's been a butcher for 30, 40 years. He's never had to sharpen the knife because he always finds the exact space in between the joints, and we're more space than we are matter, and he finds that with his knife as he's butchering animals. There's something about that relates to this, of like, how do you find that sweet spot of life that's yours, that's your essential nature that came in what we call your kidney jing. If you cruise on that, then you've got this incredible force behind you, but you're not really having to expend much yourself. You're just flowing with it. That's what you can find by getting still and being uncomfortable in winter. More of the same, quiet, listening. Listening, ears related to kidney, right? So actually listening to yourself, to the universe, to whatever higher thing you may or may not want to listen to others. Embracing the long nights. Oh, do you guys go to the, every year?
Is it the Lantern Festival?
Not the Lantern Festival. It's a Christmas,
Botanical Gardens.
no, but yes.
Big church.
The Catholic Church.
And they walk down.
And they walk with us doing the silent night. So it's like going to a midnight mass or something, right? So in a church, it's this like beautiful dark season, and it's all full of candles. And I'm really happy in a church in the dark with candles. In general, but especially in winter. And I go to this performance every year, and they sing Silent Night. It's a choral art society, right? And they sing Silent Night, and you're sitting in the church, and they line you, and I think they're also behind you, Lish. And they sing all these verses. All the lights are out, it's just candles. And how often do we sit quietly like that with others? We don't really. And then they finish, and every year it's quiet. And every year I wait for like, how long is it going to take for the uncomfortable person to start clapping? Because it's so weird to sit quietly with one another and just sit. And it's so interesting year to year. Some years it goes longer than others, but it does not go much longer than like 10 seconds. It's so quick how quickly we get uncomfortable. So what happens if you just name your fears rather than resisting them? What happens if we own them? So in the winter, can you sit quietly long enough? Is sitting itself the fear? What are you afraid of in sitting quietly without a distraction? If fears come up, what can you do with them? Can we just acknowledge them? Yeah, I'm afraid of that. Isn't that interesting? We all know, just the same way that like there's that deep breath we take in autumn that's just so pure and crisp. It's like, there is no quiet like the quiet of the snow falling, right? Whether you're in a neighborhood or in like downtown or in the woods, when everything is blanketed in that snow, that's the kind of quiet stillness that we're talking about. In the quiet reflection, it's okay not to act. It's okay to be under the ground, have it brewing internally, and not taking action above ground yet. And again, this is true, like not just for winter. Like you can think about these seasons over the course of a day or over the course of a project, like a work project. This isn't like exclusive to just our seasons, right? But as you get familiar with these different elements, you can transpose them onto different parts of your lives to give yourself a break sometimes, or to take action if it's really time to take action too. We're not talking about the seasons of action particularly, but there are those as well. Physical activity, so it's kind of the same. We don't love overexertion or forced sweating in the winter because, again, remember in the autumn how everything went interiorly? So, like, I think when people, you know how often people go to Florida and then they come back and they get sick and they're pissed at the winter again because they got sick coming back from their vacation? Our bodies aren't meant to navigate temperatures, I would argue, that quickly. Like we really are descending and emerging and descending and emerging when we're in warm and cold environments. But I don't know, an argument can be made because everybody in Scandinavia, like if you have any money apparently, you have a sauna, right? And that's hot and sweat, so maybe that falls apart. But definitely don't catch a chill outside while you're sweating. And please, please, when I see people out running and it's like 9 degrees outside, find something else to do. Like you're breathing, you're like literally you're breathing in. Remember, your lungs are right here. We have to remember what's actually happening. You're deep breathing in freezing cold air. So if you're young and you're strong and you're robust, cool. And it's probably only the youngsters that are doing this sort of thing, but they also might be causing damage they don't realize now because that cold is really getting in there. So try not to get, so maybe, you know, never mind the sweating sauna thing because I actually think that there could be some benefit, but try not to get that freezing cold air really deep in your lungs. Please. Thank you. So food stuff, it's pretty similar. We're already down and in. We're not going down and in. We're there. And we want to stay warm. So the basics again, eating seasonally, always with the caveats, like, you know, if you're like, oh, but I need to be paleo, or there's always caveats. Generally speaking, we're thinking hearty, right? Hearty, nutrient-dense food, cooked. Things that are especially taxing. These are good to avoid, you know, a lot of the time. But think about it in the winter. Sugar, too much caffeine, living on caffeine. Like caffeine has false energy, right? Whatever other stimulants, like Monster drinks or whatever those are. They deplete our kidneys. Think of it like those things aren't giving you energy. Remember we talked about principle and interest? In terms of you want to live off of the interest of your kidney, not the principle. When you're using things like sugar and caffeine and stimulants, you're diving right into the principle. You're asking your body, you're using these things to stimulate your body's principle energy that's relatively finite to give you kind of false energy now. This is not to shame anybody. I also like coffee, but it's just to put in perspective what we're actually doing. And I'll often ask people in clinic, if they're living on a lot of caffeine and stimulants, and they say, but I have to, I'm exhausted. Sometimes maybe you're raising young kids, yeah, probably you're exhausted. But can we take some of those away so we can see where your true energy actually is? And then we can build that up in a real way with acupuncture and herbs and food and other things, rather than just using the stimulants to burn up energy that you're now not going to have down the road. Does that make sense? And then I'll send recipes for these too, but bone broth, some people call it longevity soup, so really good in winter to do broths that you made or that are homemade. The broths at the store are probably fine, but there's something hardier, I think, about making it yourself. So really long cooking the bones. Remember how bones related to kidneys? So extracting the nutrients out of that supports you in general, but also specifically supports the kidney energetic. And then I've got a recipe. Ooh, wrong way, hang on. Back. Once a week, maybe, there's a chicken soup recipe. Oh, so chicken soup's especially good if you're convalescing, if you've been sick. Again, just the nutrition that comes out of cooking, out of the bone broth. And it's easier to digest and other things too. But once a week, I've got an immune supporting chicken soup, and I can send that recipe to everybody too. That's got a bunch of herbs in it. They're Chinese herbs, so you can come to me to get that aspect. And mushrooms, just as immune support. So not when you are sick, but as like once a week feeding you and your family to help prevent from getting sick. It's great. How are we on time? I'm not paying any attention. Is everybody good? Are you interested? Okay. Because I can just talk about this stuff. So we're still warming. We're still trying to avoid raw food. That doesn't mean you can't have any, like a little bit. Just no salads I would prefer not to have salad. And I have salads for lunch too. Like I'm not above this. It's just, it doesn't support us. Again, with the cooking for longer times at lower temperatures for the same reason. Yeah, I think this is basically the same as autumn. So we're going to eat this way till March. Then there are specific foods. So see, this is 201. So first, warm food, cooked food. Second, start thinking about things that actually are warming, not just because they're warm in temperature, but they're warming. So in Chinese medicine, foods are warming, foods are cooling, foods can be hot or cold. So some things that are warming are certain spices, all of like what we think of as the gingerbread spices, and that's why we do this in winter, because they're warming. We forget that like intuitively we've always done this sort of thing as humans. Walnuts are warming, black beans are, I tried to, these kind of one in each family, and then these are the meats that are warming. So lamb is actually especially warming if I need someone and I need to tonify their, what we call kidney yang. So it's warming to your body and then also warming to that particular energetic, which not everybody needs. General kidney support, dried food, concentrated food, dark beans, that some of this is blah, blah, blah. Dark beans are because the color of kidney is black, so we tend to think that black things tonify the kidney more. So like black sesame seeds are more tonifying to the kidney energetic than regular sesame seeds. There's black chickens, like black fleshed chickens, that are more tonifying, and that chicken soup that I can send you traditionally would have been made with that kind of a chicken, because it's more directed to the kidney. So that's where the dark beans come from. Seaweed, I think that relates to, so kidney can also be, aspects of kidney relate to thyroid function. So seaweed, that's there in support of thyroid function. Steamed winter greens. And then now we're flavors, right? High level cooking. Salty and bitter. Again, this doesn't mean to like drink salt water and eat all bitter foods by any means. Think of these things as condiments. We want them to be appropriate. Most of us in our culture, too much salt already, unless we're cooking at home. But you want to have good salt. And so they're both going to promote this syncing and centering. So we kind of want to keep the energy concentrated in the middle. Again, that makes us less susceptible to what's happening out here. We don't want to disperse it out. The cooler, so that's what we were saying here, with a cooler surface, one notices cold less. So in the winter, our surface is cooler. because we've descended. So bitter things, lettuce, watercress, like all of our bitter greens, which you can get small amounts of in winter, turnips, some of the things, I know these aren't in season, so life is complicated. We live in complex systems, but they are bitter too. So thinking about, or even tea, right? Having like chai is, but having black tea is bitter. And then salty, miso, soy sauce, seaweeds, good quality sea salt, not too much. Those are going to support the kidney energetic. Most Americans don't need to be worrying about supporting the kidney energetic, they just need to eat some broccoli, right? So like this is really way more refined than most of us need to get. We just need to eat real food. So clothing for the kidneys. There's actually a clothing item. Have anyone heard of this one? A belly band. So it's a Japanese belly band. I think it has traditions in other Asian cultures as well. But it's this idea of wrapping around your low back to keep your kidneys and your low back warm. I tell people all the time in my clinic, I don't leave the house again after Labor Day without having something underneath. It's not just because I know better. I honestly can't imagine how anyone gets through their day having a draft bumping up against their skin. It's like the most uncomfortable thing for me. But if we're trying to stay warm, if you've got any issues in the clinic related to the kidney, if we're trying to support ourselves moving through winter, seriously consider getting a bunch of basically camisoles, and they should be tight. Part of the point is drafts. Tight to your skin, always tucked in, or always tight down here. If you've got lung stuff, you can even go with this one where it's all the way up. And I get to the place too where, I've got a camisole on like that, but like I told you guys, my lungs, they're a little bit weak today. You can probably hear it. They got kind of weak last week, and I was like, oh, that's cute. I'm giving a talk about staying healthy, and my lungs are acting up. But it's because this never happened until I got this really intense cough 3 years ago. And I actually wish, I should probably make it, but I wish that my camisoles went up to here because I can feel the difference in terms of the support in my lung. There are some people who don't like undershirts. It's too hot. Or they might be here, I won't name who, but they're too hot. Or like it feels oppressive. They don't like having something touching their skin. That becomes diagnostic for me in the clinic. But for most of us, we can benefit from this in the winter. Cover your ears. Ears are related to the kidneys. Most of us do this. Aren't those great? Which one would you pick? He can look at this guy. He can like decide if he wants to have him down or up. So really like hats, scarves, earmuffs, whatever you need, bands, something. Got to protect the cold goes right in. Which we take for granted until you've got an ear infection or something, or trigeminal neuralgia, and then you're like, oh, the cold, I have to cover the whole side of my face. And then the same thing. Please no wet heads outside in winter. So that's our winter. Are we good? You guys good? Still with me? Okay. So then there's other general stuff. Just a few things. It's not a lot. It's the basics. This is the I know conversation that we have a lot. And none of this is to shame you if these are not things that you do. It's just to remind you that if what you seek is to be in your best health, and that doesn't have to be what you seek either, right? You could have other agendas, like I'm going to burn the candle at both ends because I am going to do the thing. That's cool. But you got to understand what that means in terms of your health and in terms of your longevity. You don't get to have it both ways. We can't go against nature, right? So if you want to behave in the interest of your best health, these are relatively non-negotiable. Some people don't need 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night. Legitimately, most people do. Get curious, see where you fall. I've literally had a woman who went to the doctor, had every test run. They could find nothing the matter with her. She came to me. There were some things Chinese medicine could make sense of, but she wasn't getting enough sleep, and she didn't have young kids, and it was her own doing. She wasn't, I think if I'm remembering, she just kind of felt guilty, like she should be up doing things. So literally her prescription was for the next 3 weeks, you need to block out this time as if it's an appointment that you have to keep. You've got to get in bed for 9 hours every night, fatigue cured, right? So again, we have to be careful that we're pathologizing things when it really comes down to just basic self-care. Eat a variety of food. So we gave you all the specifics of food, but the most important is the basics. This time of year that it's cooked and warm. In general, that you're eating a variety, that's nutrient dense, without excessive sugar. I would avoid sugar entirely if you feel like your immune system's under threat. That's important, right? We know that it depresses your immune system in the short term, so if you're coming down with something, avoid the sugar, avoid the alcohol. Like, please do not drink orange juice thinking you're getting vitamin C. But Michael Pollan, who knows Michael Pollan? Yeah, a bunch of you. Great guy, lots of good food journalism, really heady. But it's so simple. Eat real food, not too much, mostly plants. That's the foundation for all of us. And then from there, we layer things in, depending on the season, depending on the time of life, depending on your particular issues. But until we're here, there's nothing to talk about. We have to start here. Hydrate, we talked a little bit about this, maybe half your body weight in ounces. I'm really interested in you getting to know your thirst. So many times I ask people in clinic, how's your thirst? And they answer me with how much water they drink. And it's funny because it's not like they're not the same question. So people are drinking an amount of water because they're told and not in touch with their thirst. So like I said, part of my mission is to get you back in touch with your body. You are the expert in your body, nobody else. I want to help you understand how you can be an expert and what your body is trying to tell you all the time. So definitely hydrate, watch your urine, things like that, but notice your thirst. And like we said, if you're eating more vegetables, you're going to be less thirsty. You don't need as much extra water. Moving your body 30 minutes a day, somehow, do something as a baseline. There's a bajillion other ways we could talk about exercise and movement, right? But this is just our baseline. We have to do this. We've got to get outside and breathe fresh air. 30 minutes a day, I would argue. And ideally at the same time, that can be really helpful for hormonal issues because it helps reset the pineal gland because you're getting sunlight at the same angle at the same time. So 30 minutes a day in general, and then if there are hormonal things going on, trying to do it at basically the same time can really help. Finding time for moments of reflection. So whether that's meditation or a gratitude journal. Gratitude, this is like a I know, or that's silly. This is another like open mind moment with the gratitude journal. You can knock it, but once you've tried it, I don't think that you will anymore. Like, I can't tell you how many patients have come back and told me that it's changed their life. It wasn't my idea, just passed it along. We know that there are some studies that show that simply writing down for a period of time the 3 best things, reflecting on the 3 best things and going through the 3 best things makes you have to run through your whole day and like search out for the best stuff. It also makes you more aware during the day of, oh, was that a best thing that just happened? So you're sort of like looking for gratitude all day long. It did better than antidepressants in terms of changing mood. So it's really, really impactful. In some studies, not in all, obviously. Moments of connection for life and for our immunity. That's what we're here talking about, how to stay healthy this winter. We all know that social connection boosts immunity. So making sure we have time for that. Laughter, same thing. I go through times where I will literally, my morning coffee has to be over like Wanda Sykes or something because there has to be some laughter. So bring it in. If there's no one around you that's laughing, bring it in artificially. Have it on your audiobook. Have it playing on your phone as you're brushing your teeth. Like, I've had times in my life where I don't let my mind to its own devices. I'm surrounded by fun stuff all of the time because sometimes we all need that. I missed? Yeah.
I was more of a question. Do you have any other drinks besides like the chai tea that you like?
In general, I like green tea after lunch, and bone broth is really great to sip on because it's really warming in the winter. Those are my go-tos. Yeah. It's 7:30, guys. Is everybody okay? Okay, we're almost done. I didn't time this, clearly. Bye, thank you. Okay, so now we're into like, what are my recommendations? A lot of you know this, yes?
I got put on that and it made me so tired.
Okay.
All the time.
So it wasn't the right fit for you?
But is that a normal reaction?
I haven't experienced that, but here's how it works in my clinic. What's true for you is true. So that gives me information. Now I know, I met this woman at a talk that I gave who got on the Imuplex and she was really tired.
It was that brand name.
Yeah. So I don't know your story. So these are my basic, and like here, I'm not your doctor. This is not a prescription. No results are guaranteed or implied, right? Everyone's different. So however something acts on you is just how it acts on you. Sometimes that gives us information. If I'm prescribing Chinese herbs, for example, I just had a conversation with a patient today. Got her on a new formula. She was doing great. Switched the formula. Thought we were on the right track. Totally wrong formula. She's having, quote, side effects. She's not. The formula is doing exactly what it should do. We've just discovered it's doing that on the wrong body. It's not meant for her. So sometimes we get information that way when people have reactions we don't intend. Sometimes things just don't agree with you. And so then we learn something and then we figure out what else we might be able to use that would agree with you. That's a good, thank you though for pointing that out. So these are just a handful of products that I find really, really useful. I use them. I put lots of patients on them in a general way. These are not person specific necessarily, but I've had people, on rounds of steroids for multiple bouts of bronchitis that weren't going away, and we get them on, along with acupuncture, a personalized program of care, but including these, and no more steroids. So Imuplex is one. It's a great immune tonic. It's a glandular, so it uses animal glandular tissue to support our immune system. Power mushrooms. So mushrooms support immunity. There are lots of great brands. I'm sure you guys carry some here of mushroom formulas. So I am not married to this brand. It happens to be the one that I use in clinic, but there are lots of really good brands. And these are not things that I tell people to take all of the time. It's like if you're feeling run down, if you're feeling exposed, if you're next to the guy hacking up a lung on the airplane, if everybody at your kid's school is sick, like you just feel like maybe you need a little extra support, a couple days of this can really kick things out. Elderberry tincture, I love this. You guys have this here. Syrup is great too, but syrup is really sugary for one, and we're trying to it always tastes so sugary to me. And it's messy and not easily portable, so great for home. This product I love because I don't travel anywhere I'm on an airplane tomorrow and all of these things are coming with me, and this is like a little bottle like that I can put in my carry-on easily. Antiviral, right? Ashwagandha. So an adaptogen. I use it as a tincture. It comes in lots of ways. They've got lots of varieties of ashwagandha here. This is the one that I tend to use more often in my clinic. Again, I like the tincture because you can travel with it, and they've got tinctures of it over here too. Squirt it under your tongue. I think of this more as I am getting stressed out, and therefore I'm susceptible to getting sick. Whereas the other ones are like a little more like I'm getting run down. This is more I'm stressed. I'm stressed. Like that little difference there. And then the fifth one is the I don't know, because this is when I've got people in clinic that I'm working with. If we determine they tend to get sick in a particular predictable way, then I'll recommend that they keep a particular Chinese formulation in their medicine cabinet to treat their particular way of falling apart. Some people always start with a sore throat, like a dry, raspy, like, oh shoot, there it is, right? Some people, it skips up here entirely and they have like a moment of, I think I'm getting sick, and then it just lands straight in their chest. We've all had that experience, I think, of like when you're sick and then you can feel it descending and you're like, oh no, I didn't kick it out. So those are completely different herbal formulations that we would give to someone. Or if someone's prone to allergies in the fall, or if they get sick and they've always got like they get a headache and their neck and shoulders get tight and cold. Some people get sick that way. Whole other formula from the person who gets a sore throat. So if people know their way of falling apart, then we can fortify you, and so you can have that formula on hand. Right, so specific to you. Is it allergic? Everything we just said. And then that's when it's just at the start, and I like people to have it on hand. Then as we get farther along, it becomes much more case specific. And Chinese medicine has a whole pharmacopoeia of ways to treat all kinds of things. So this idea of like if it's a virus, you have to just wait it out, it's not true in our medicine. We've got lots of ways to make sense of viruses, and lots of evidence. Eilish, thank you. Anyway, lots of things we can do to help you out. A couple other things. Who eats a bunch of sugar starting Thursday. And continues through till like January 2nd, just like non-stop sugar party, right? So there's this product called Gymnema. It comes out of the Ayurvedic tradition. It's not a Chinese medicinal herb, it's an Ayurvedic herb. The Sanskrit translates to sugar blaster. It really balances blood sugars internally, so I prescribe it when people are just really struggling with sugar cravings. Take it intensively for a few days. It can even things out and just give you that little extra bit of leverage that you need to resist the cakes at the table in between all of the actual holidays, because we make it one long, like 3-month holiday. It also, there's a party trick, and if anyone wants to experience the party trick, I have it here to try. If you suck on one of these tablets, it will anesthetize the sweet taste buds on your tongue, and then when you eat sugar, you'll taste everything except the sugar. So it tastes gross. You don't want the thing. So you can use it as a party trick to avoid. If anyone wants to try that, we can. So this is a really great, I've had only a couple people who felt like it didn't help. Most people really feels like it gives them the traction they're looking for. Another thing people keep in their medicine cabinet for when they kind of have the one piece of cake that then turns into half of the cake over the sink, and now they're back on. And then one other thing, there's lots of ways that we have something called food stagnation in Chinese medicine. So when you've overeaten from a big meal and your digestion feels like it never quite recovers, it just feels heavy, like you're not still full, but something's the matter. There's a formula called Bao Hewan and then other kind of food stagnation herbs that can help resolve that when it's acute overeating. Okay, I think that's all of my stuff. Who's got questions? Anybody? It's not a, yes.
What do we do in March? I mean, to me, that's the worst.
What do you do in March?
Yeah.
What are you asking? In terms of what?
Spring, but it's not even close.
You stay with your stillness. Well, no, I mean, I think by March, there is some movement happening in us as humans. That's why we're resisting it. So it's not mirrored yet outside, but the sap is rising in March. Thank you. Right? Like we're sugaring, and that's evidence of that actual internal movement is coming up. And so our frustration in March comes from exactly that. Like we're ready to go. And so maybe just recognizing it as that, like, oh, I am ready for spring. I am ready for the next phase. Isn't it great that I'm still alive and I'm coming back out of my hibernation, and be excited about that. And then we're frustrated because the earth is taking a little longer to catch up. Yeah. Keep your scarf on. Yeah. Keep the shovel out. Anybody else? Whoops. No? Okay. You guys are raring to go. You've been so patient. Thank you. So we'll skip that. I was going to have you tell the person next to you what you're going to implement tomorrow. You can do that before you go. Everyone's antsy. We're going to cruise through. If anyone needs anything from me specifically, check in with me. We do free consultations, and we can get those on the calendar if you feel like this is useful and you or someone you love could use some extra support. I'm always happy to do that. Wrong. Oh, I'm doing this like 4 times. No. Oh, the drawing.